Custom built wheels, they're not just for show, and today we're going to be reviewing the SpokeX SX310s, letting you know how we got along with them out on the trail after a few months of testing. All right, so several months ago, we got a couple of emails from Hunter, who is the owner of SpokeX Wheels. It was a brand that we really hadn't heard very much of. And while he offered to send us some wheels out for review, we frankly were just a little too busy. We just didn't have the manpower to dedicate the time and effort into a wheel review. And then we bumped into Hunter at the Bentonville Bike Fest last year. He had a wheel box with him and said, "Hey dude, I've got a set of wheels that we built for a customer. They're pretty wacky and wild. They're designed to match his bike." And he canceled the order. So I've got this wheel set. It's yours to try it out, no pressure. So he left the wheels with us, and we put them on a couple of different bikes and have had a lot of fun on them. So SpokeX, let's talk a little bit about the brand. The SpokeX team is based out of Southern California and originally was a garage built operation. Hunter, who I said we met earlier, started building wheels out of his garage and apparently developed a strong enough reputation in the area that he grew his business, left the garage, and now has a shop with several wheel builders employed. They do everything from custom bike builds to custom wheel builds and beyond. So it's really cool to see a small business kind of take off and grow like that. And part of this review process was, spent learning about the business and where they came from. So building a wheel is something that, not everyone can do well, but a lot of people certainly can do. And so, taking someone else's hubs and someone else's spokes and just assembling them, is a talent and a skill, absolutely. But getting them to hold up and then ride well is definitely a whole other task. And so what SpokeX did actually was, in this process, was get an off-the-shelf rim and start building themselves. I think as Hunter kind of was looking to expand this business and offer his own complete wheel set. And through that testing process, found there were some improvements they wanted to make to the rim and ended up opening up their own mold. They opted to go with a offset spoke design. They added 2 extra layers here in this rim bed because one of the things that SpokeX does in their wheel building philosophy is to assemble a high tension wheel. So all of their wheels are built with a pretty high spoke tension. Now, something I will say here is, there's a lot of people talking about tuned wheels these days, and it's really neat to see. I'm personally a believer in it. If you've seen our reviews on like the Zip Moto wheels or even the Crank Brothers Synthesis wheels, these are brands and wheels that take different spoke counts and stiffnesses and put a front and rear package together. What's different in SpokeX is that you can actually call them and talk to them, and you can tell them how much you weigh, what skill level you are as a rider, and where you live, right? What type of trails you like to ride. So, if you're a rider who's, always scrambling for traction, you want a little bit more of a compliant wheel to keep those tires down instead of deflecting, you can talk with their wheel builders and do that. If you are a guy who is just railing big solid berms in high traction environments, you're obviously going to probably want a little bit of a stiffer wheel build, and there will be pros and cons for that. So I think it's cool that the tuned wheel thing is taken off, and for some brands it might be a little bit more of a marketing gimmick because it's tuned front and rear. I think what's cool here is that these are tuned for the rider. So that being said, we didn't have the opportunity to do that full custom build process because this was built for another rider and his bike. That being said, we found out it was a pretty neutral standard tune for these guys, and I, at about 170, 175 pounds, found the wheels to be pretty dang impressive overall. But before we kind of get into my full ride analysis, let's talk about some of the details on the rim and the builds, because I know you guys will probably be upset if we don't talk about that stuff. So the rims here are 505 grams roughly for a 29 and 485 grams for a 27.5. It is a 31 millimeter internal rim width with a 38 millimeter outer width, and they've got a 23.5 millimeter deep profile. So they're definitely not overly deep, and I think it's probably one of the reasons they offer the ride quality that they do. Now, the wheels come in at $1,400 without getting into any of the customization you can do. So SpokeX does have in-house powder coating capabilities, which will lead to some, builds like this. You can opt to do a little bit more of a standard, kind of a toned down option. You can do Industry 9 Hydra hubs, or there's some options from Onyx. So your budget, how crazy custom you want to get, is kind of all up to you, and I think that's a really cool feature. And now that we've ridden these, I think we might be reaching back out to the guys at SpokeX to build us a set that might match our bike a little better. So that being said, that gives you a little bit on the rim, wheel build, all that sort of stuff. So let's get into the ride quality. Obviously, Industry 9 Hydra hubs. Lots of wheel sets and riders are probably familiar with those. Got a good solid engagement for all of you audio guys that want to hear this thing. They are pretty solid. Good engagement there. We've got our setup for a SRAM XD driver body. At the time of your wheel build, you can select obviously what works for your drivetrain and equipment. But no complaints there from a reliability standpoint. These hubs are solid and work well. Also available in a lot of colors. The wheel build, again, we've had these on a few different bikes. Most of the time we had them on the Norco range, and we spent a lot of time in the bike park, specifically Mount Bachelor, which is a very rocky and abusive bike park. And we had these WTV tires on here with the light, fast rolling casing. So we kind of intentionally under-spec'd the tires on these because we wanted to see how badly we could punish them. And the spoke tension is still pretty dang stiff. We had these here in our little feedback truing stand, and they are straight as an arrow. So that's cool and all. Ride quality is important, right? Anyone can make a really stiff wheel that doesn't budge, but something that rides well is a little bit harder to achieve, and somehow SpokeX has managed to do that. If you've watched many of our wheel reviews, you'll know I'm pretty critical about hand and foot fatigue and a stiff, chattery bike, and that's something that I really pay attention to on the rough and rocky trails that I like to ride the most. And while these are not the most compliant, they're definitely not abusive or overly stiff. I think that they offer good traction, not Zip 3.0 Moto, or maybe not quite Crank Brothers Synthesis level, but it wasn't a criticism or a complaint I had about the wheel. Conversely, they were a little bit better than those wheels when it came into ripping into really tacky wet berms, or wanting a really stiff rear end to kind of slam into a corner. A real snappy feel. So I think the stiffness worked to its advantage in some terrain scenarios, and I wouldn't necessarily say that they were so stiff that they took away, some wheels can just be a little bit overly harsh. I would put them pretty close to a WeR1 wheel build, probably a little bit on the stiffer side, but really close. And at $1,400 with a lifetime warranty, they say if it breaks while you're riding it, they'll replace it, no questions asked. So I think that's a pretty competitive offer from a price, craftsmanship, and a build guarantee. So overall, I would say I'm quite surprised and pleased with how these SpokeX SX310 wheels have performed. Again, they weren't really a brand we knew a ton about. My initial impressions were like, yeah, they looked cool, you know, maybe color aside, but just from a build and the rim and the finish, they looked good. But that spoke tension, I was like, dude, these things are gonna ride like rails. But I was really surprised that they kind of allowed me make the corners and hold the traction when I wanted without beating me up, but still did really good in the corners and when, like, you know, landing big compressions or wanting to get that push off of a bike. So I gotta say props to SpokeX for some really cool wheels. Thank you guys very much for watching this video. If you haven't, please subscribe to the channel, and we hope to see you out on the trails.